Hello, guys. Welcome. Woo woo. Welcome to the show. This is Semi Woo, and my name is Amanda, coming to you again from Ecuador.
And this is Heather, all up in Seattle, now living in the country. Just the city girl just moved out to the woods.
And welcome to the show. Today we are interviewing our longtime friend, awesome sex activist and sex worker and beautiful all-around fabulous woman, J Leigh Brantly. Hello, J Leigh. Welcome to the show.
What's up, ladies? Hey, hey.
Hey.
It's so nice to be here.
So, Jay, I'm going to give you a chance to go ahead because you have been working on so many awesome projects in the last few years since we spent an amazing summer together in Montauk. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to just introduce yourself to the world and tell us who you are and what you've been up to.
Oh, cool. All right. My name is Jay. I guess I can start with the basics. I identify as a genderqueer person, and I've been working mostly in the sex worker activism communities and here in New York City where I live. And I've been a pro-dom, that's short for professional dominatrix, for the last 7 years, roughly, and moved into organizing activism with sex worker rights movement, as well as doing some community-based research. I work with a few different organizations here. One is called GLIT, Gays and Lesbians Living in a Transgender Society. So I also work with the SOAR Institute, which is the Sharmus Outlaw Advocacy and Rights Institute here in Brooklyn.
Okay, pause. What is Sharmus?
Yeah,
Sharmus was a transgender woman of color that was a massive figure in the sex worker rights community. And she passed away a couple years ago and was just this amazing unifying figure. And so the Institute was named after her in her honor. So,
awesome.
So that, and also with a place called Best Practices Policy Project out of New Jersey, doing some community-based research there, mentorship of other sex workers, and these kinds of things. So, yeah, that's been my big passion the past year and a half so, and doing things like the women's marches and fundraising organizations, showing up to with kind of intersection of the courtroom issues for sex workers and these kinds of things. So we are all marching on and moving forward to establish our place in this very polarized country that we find ourselves in currently.
Definitely.
So
awesome.
We're moving towards.
It sounds like you've been extremely busy.
I have been busy, but everybody's busy.
We're all so busy.
Everybody's busy. But yeah, it's been a joy, honestly. And it's been an honor that the community has, kind of welcomed me, with such open arms. And there are people who've been fighting this fight for a hell of a lot longer than I have. So I'm honored to be able to join in the ranks as we move forward towards sexual freedom stuff. So
I have a question for you. What was there an actual kind of time in your career or in the last few years when you kind of started to shift from your more like pro-dom entertainment? I know you were doing some entertainment consulting for some TV shows and for some movies and fetish work. And when you started spending more of your time in the kind of advocacy side?
Yeah, it moved in that direction when I realized that I wanted to long-term pursue research. I found myself really kind of approaching a lot of my private sessions in very much of more of a scientific perspective and wanting to observe and also kind of pull myself away from being a service provider as a fetish worker to wanting to actually do more research and take a step away from it and, kind of contribute to a greater narrative of human sexual behavior and understanding it, which is really very, still very much a newer science, in the social sciences, and wanting to, go into public health and really help people live lives more from a, academic, community-based research, and evidence-based kind of approach. So that's where the shift started happening. Yeah, you are correct. I traveled different parts of the country doing conferences and workshops and teaching about alternative sexuality, and instructing other fetish workers. I'm also a fetish wrestler myself too, so doing stuff like that. But I still obviously love performing, because certainly in my way that I express my sex work, it is definitely about performance art. So sometimes I will perform as male or gender non-binary, and a lot of the things that we do in professional domination is already gender transgressive. This idea of a woman becoming a dominant masculine figure, whether or not she's sort of feminine in her expression of that, it still is a very transgressive role reversal, intentionally so. So ultimately, I just got to a point where I was like, wow, I really kind of think like a scientist, and my nerd brain, kind of started emerging, and I just had so many questions and wanting to really give people some science and evidence-based answers rather than my sort of gospel of opinion. And the only way to do that is through research. So curiosity, and endless curiosity, is probably, I'd say, my greatest strength in life. And so I think that started to find a new expression when I realized I wanted to go into research. So as a result of that, moving into advocacy was the next step, as I'm, pursuing my graduate studies.
Awesome.
So that's something that I could do very intentionally with volunteering in these different organizations as I get more experience and thrust myself into these communities that I want to study.
Right.
So.
Congrats.
What type of research projects can one look forward to, or what type of research projects have you seen related to this area, or ones that you want to study? Because I'm trying to think of what they would be.
Sure. Yeah. So in the last year, I had the fortunate opportunity to meet a fellow wild child, if you will. A Burning Man buddy introduced me to a researcher here in New York right after I went to Burning Man. That was really a life-changing experience. And she ended up inviting me onto one of her research projects which is called the casualsexproject.com, which anyone can actually go on right now and sort of upload their stories of their casual sex encounters and stuff. So I did a little data coding for her to sort of get my feet wet in how to work on a research project of that capacity, which is really fucking cool. And actually fucking cool because it's about sex. Oh, sorry, hi-oh. Sorry, I had to. But yeah, so that was really my first research project, and it was so great. I mean, I loved the data, and I loved the numbers of it, and that was surprising because I grew up in a very arts heavy culture and arts heavy family. So to turn this part of my brain on has been really exciting and rewarding. The organizational side, the mathematical side, and all that. So the second thing that I'm working on now that I will be starting up with is something called SexHum, SEXHUM, which is an international research project that is largely funded by an organization in the European Union. And so basically we are tracking migration patterns of sex workers across the world. And I'm really excited to be doing that because it's going to be some ethnographic film, which my background in documentary and nonfiction film has turned out to be, very helpful in that respect. And it's I'm stoked for learning, new lessons about, ethnofiction and all that kind of stuff, and learning from these amazing researchers that have been killing it, and just doing great work out of Europe. It's a different playing field there. And, one of the reasons why I'm, interested in doing this type of research, not just on sex workers, but alternative sexuality such as fetish, BDSM, even asexuality, intersex persons, LGBTQ issues, and disability. So disability has been a big one for me, physical disability. I had a lot of physically disabled clients. For the amount of clients that I had, the percentage I've been told is a lot higher than my other fellow sex workers. And I think it's because I really kind of sought out having folks that were queer and that were physically disabled or in wheelchairs or these kinds of things as clients, because I really feel like alternative sexuality is a fantastic way to get folks to connect with themselves and to connect with their bodies. So that's one of the reasons why I'd like to do some research within that sphere as well.
That's awesome. This is so interesting because, now that you have even just begun to kind of open up the Pandora's box of like what we could possibly begin to study, it really is making me realize we don't have hardly any information that's accessible, or that you said that's research-based, that isn't anecdotal, or that it isn't, from kind of like hidden sources or from, the 1950s, or really anything that is from a healthy sex-positive perspective that's research other than just like men do this, women do this, like, what I mean? There's like, there really isn't much.
It's really limited. Dr. Jana, who is the woman that I worked under for her sex project, she just started another podcast called The Science of Sex, which I definitely, I don't want to plug another podcast, but
plug it. Why not?
It's a really great podcast where she's talking about what you just mentioned, the latest research on human sexuality across the world, but it still is, by and large, fairly new in comparison. And, we're just scratching the surface of human behavior with things that are happening in the world right now that we're questioning, that have, for all intents and purposes, been told that are just facts. Things like this idea of male and female, right? In our greater kind of human history, we've divided things so simply.
Right.
Particularly in our Western and perspective, that we're just starting to open these things up. Transgender rights are huge right now. Gender non-binary folks, we're all kind of getting to a point, I feel like, where we realize that this shit is just not as simple as we want it to be. And the only way that we can move in towards freedom is to have a more open mindedness about how we approach our human behavior, and have a different frame of reference for it than we've had historically.
That's awesome. So that leads me to another question, because in the article that you were recently a part of in Time, which we're actually going to talk about that in a little bit, but I noticed that you had, that was the first time that I had seen since I've known you that you identified as genderqueer. And I was wondering, kind of in the last 10 years, I guess it's been, I think like 15 years or so since we first met back at film school and we were innocent little girls. But what has been your journey as far as your gender and your sexuality, of feeling like now that you can kind of like, feel that you don't want to kind of belong to like male or female or masculine, feminine identity?
Sure, that's a great question. It's one of those things that for me, I feel like I've never felt like a traditional cisgendered woman. Like that's never been a part of my life. And back in the 90s, we had different words and expressions for that, like tomboy and masculine and aggressive. Like these were the words that were both thrust upon me and things that I internalized as well. And yet, I've always just loved performing gender, right? Like putting on the makeup and the this, the that. I've cross-dressed for as long as I can remember, and did some performances as in drag king performances as male packed, these kinds of things. So it's always felt really, really not clear to me that I should be this quote unquote woman. But I never had any culture or community or language for it really until the past couple years. And so I realized, well, it just isn't, it's just not as easy to say for me that it's a binary issue, like being male or female. It just doesn't fit either one. It's kind of like yes and maybe both, kind of, sorta, which is where we're, there are a lot of cultures that have multiple genders, and if we're talking about biological sex, that's one issue. But when we're talking about gender expression, there are times where I find myself feeling very, very masculine and very male. And so it's been really rewarding to finally feel like I could have a community that understood those things, that we don't necessarily, subscribe to any of it.
Exactly.
And why do we need it also? There are reasons, certainly, but I like asking the questions why a lot, even if I don't have the answer for it. So, so it's been a journey is probably the less long-winded version of that. It's been a journey, but in the past couple of years, it's been so nice to be able to have a community of people that are like me as well. They're like, oh yeah, absolutely. Genderqueer, gender non-binary, non-conforming, panhuman, whatever you want to call it.
And
and it's been really exciting to feel like that I can express that in a political way,
right?
That I don't have to just kind of have my quote unquote little quirks, the things that I like to dress up as or experience or perform, but that there is something greater here that's happening when we talk about gender identity.
Yeah. It's so weird that you would try to put 700 or like 7 billion people, into like one of two categories of any type.
Exactly.
Like, at all.
Bingo.
And to think there's no spectrum at all. It's so as if anything in the world is so black and white.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. To bring it back to that Time article, I was blown away, and I thought it was. I was like, oh, that's my friend's name in a big magazine. Like starstruck. But the article totally resonated with me. And tell us a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, the article was basically about whether sex workers feel included into the Me Too movement. And so they asked a few of us. Certainly, I don't represent all of the viewpoints of sex workers or even people within the sex worker rights movement. But there were a few of us that were asked for our opinions of it. And I mean, y'all know me by now. If somebody asks me opinion, I'm going to fucking talk until they tell me to shut the hell up.
You what?
Wait, what? So it was, definitely I was honored to be able to, throw my 2 cents in there. But my experience as a fetish worker within the sex worker community and as a genderqueer person who has a lot of queer clients, couples, and in this space, I think, provided perhaps the unique perspective in this way. It was basically, I was talking about, what I have felt that many times when we are addressing systemic problems as a movement, a cultural or sociological movement, there is this tendency towards pendulum swinging from one extreme to the other. Mm-hmm. A lot of people, I believe, are concerned about there being this very pendulum swing to sort of sexual repression and to hypersensitivity of sexual expression and sexual curiosity as we're trying to navigate some very murky waters and trying to right some very deeply ingrained systemic problems with toxic masculinity and male sexual violence. So as we're trying to have these conversations, as we're trying to have educational models, we are really, I think, going in a very conservative direction because it seems to me that as Americans, we really like things to be extreme. we're not really known for our nuance in the world.
Nope.
For our subtlety.
Middle ground isn't where we play here in America.
We don't like the middle ground. We want one end zone or the other because that's the only place that you score at, right? It's not the game that we're playing, it's who wins. And I think that kind of polarity is one of the reasons why we have so many problems in our culture when we talk about sexual violence and harassment. And so all that to say, there is a sect of feminism, sort of the Gloria Steinems of the world that are pretty negative about sex work. They don't believe there's any way a person would, choose to do sex work in any other capacity other than coercively. And these types of people have been very vocal about their position on that we're all sort of victims and, we're agreeing with the patriarchy and this and that. And so our concern as sex workers is that we are, as women, perhaps now becoming our own oppressors, right? And I didn't really say that so much in the article, but I think that's my personal gist, is that if we are telling women, other women, not ourselves, but other women, how they can express their body, what they're allowed to do with their body in a consenting manner, in a way that it is safe, and we're saying this is okay, but this is not, isn't that the same as a suppressive, misogynistic culture?
Mm-hmm. It sounded very much like, a man rapes a woman and he goes, oh, but she was wearing a short skirt. She asked for it. And a sex worker experiences violence and, oh, well, she's in this industry. So.
Right. Exactly.
She's asking for it. And I, as somebody that, I don't know what it's called, like sex work light or it's sex work. I've done some escorting, had sugar daddies. And it was always so interesting, the reactions of certain people of how that resonated with them, where some people were like interested and some people just downright looked like I was a victim right away without even thinking about the fact that I'm telling you and I'm excited about it. And I always had to kind of fight for this stance of like, no, I chose it. I enjoy it. In fact, a lot of the gentlemen that I work with treat me better than a lot of the dudes that I'm going out with that aren't even paying for the damn thing. There's still so many layers of our sexuality to uncover, and I think I'm starting to like get a sense of like what research like yours could really bring to light and what we could really learn. Yeah.
I want to say something on that too. What's interesting, Heather, when you were saying that, when people either like immediately look to you as a victim, right? Like that Jay, like you were saying, that there's still this narrative of, the people are being coerced. Like, isn't the root of that really like women do not enjoy sex? Therefore, if they choose, like, if this gender as a whole chooses to be involved in sexuality, they must be coerced in some way. Like, that's kind of what the root of the whole thing is.
You hit the nail on the head. And to be honest, I wish, y'all had thrown your 2 cents in this article as well, because you're 100% in alignment with what we're talking about. It's a sex negative culture that says that we don't have agency over our bodies. It also says that we're not the perfect victim, and I did touch on that in the article. There is this idea of a perfect victim. By the way, that perfect victim is usually white. She is usually privileged. She is usually, American. She's not a migrant worker. She's not a queer person. You understand what I'm saying? There's a very particular...
the captain of a certain team.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
She's not a sex worker.
Mm-hmm.
She's not a perfect victim. Because, as I said before, because we live in this...
Even the women of color in the Me Too movement pretty much have been like cisgendered straight women too.
Right. Exactly. So, and definitely throwing that, the queer narrative in there as well. There is just this one-dimensional perspective of what a victim looks like, right? And sex workers are not that perfect victim model. Because once again, as you were saying before, this idea of what we're wearing, okay, if in the current culture, where not all, but most sex work is criminalized. If by some chance I was either harassed on the job, in legal sex work, such as stripping, one of the quotes I put in there is that, there's no HR department in the strip club, right? There's no HR department in the strip club. You see what I'm saying? So even under a legally regulated business, such as exotic dancing, there aren't protections for sex workers, right? You don't want us to pay the taxes, but you don't want us to give us the same protections that any other industry would have. So if a person were to experience a violation of their boundaries, sexually or otherwise, harassment, what are they going to do? Oh, you're going to go to the cops? Okay, cool. So the first question is, SOAR, what was the context? Well, I was in the strip club. So now you lose immediate credibility because of our sex negative culture. Then it's, well, what were you wearing? Well, I was wearing my work gear or whatever, a G-string or otherwise. You see what I'm saying? We have to not only...
if you're in an industry, even if it's like the legal sex work industry, that immediately, if you go to any sort of authority, like the cops or to anyone to report harassment or to report abuse, that you're not going to be taken seriously at all.
Yeah, by and large, I think that's true. And everybody is a little bit different, certainly, but as a systemic problem, sure, sex workers, whether they're legally regulated, such as, phone sex operators, webcam folks, porn performers, strippers, whatever, they still have their integrity questioned, and they're, they are put under a microscope that folks that are not in that industry are. So the questions that would be asked are, definitely more loaded with leading sexual innuendo. Of course they are, because we don't value the work. So there's immediate doubt on the person who's reporting in this culture. And then also, there are well-documented cases of abuses within the police department of sex workers being coerced by police officers when they come in to report, with being threatened with with arrest of prostitution, and are coerced through sexual favors, right? So this is well documented in different places like Baltimore and other cities throughout the United States, larger cities. So they certainly, there are fantastic police officers out there, but there are also some horrible ones, right? So
yeah, of course,
when you have those things stacked against you, and let me just deviate here for a second. Sex workers are in a very precarious situation if they use their real name. The internet's forever. So if you out yourself, you better be damn sure that you're ready to fight this for the long haul, because they have to protecting their identity if they want to have children. The fact that at one point they did sex work can be used against them to take their children away. I mean, there are just even situations that you don't even immediately think of, wherein your sex work can compromise your your immigration status, where it can compromise your work, should you choose to get out of the sex industry. There are a lot of long-term ramifications of doing sex work. It's the oldest profession. It's not going anywhere, and we're all, all fighting against the stigma. And
right.
It's just amazing to me.
Yeah. It's so weird that an industry that is worth billions and billions of dollars, and that almost everyone participates in, if you look all the way from like you said, erotic dancing or pornography or erotic
Correct.
stories, all the way up to people who are spending probably tens of thousands of dollars on private sessions and whatever it is, right? Everyone at one time in their life has in some way participated in this industry, and yet we demonize anyone who would possibly be a performer or an entertainer with lifelong consequences. Yet we are all the ones that are participating in it. It's so backwards.
Absolutely. It's incredibly hypocritical. And I'm so glad that you touched on that, because I was just about to make the point that you made it for me much more articulately. My good friend, her name is Blair Hopkins, and she is a photographer. I think y'all met Blair before.
We've heard of Blair.
Yeah, she's you've heard of Blair, fetish photographer, and she had for several years traveled around the United States and abroad, interviewing sex workers. And in fact, her book is launching this week, All in a Day's Sex Work. I'm one of the sex workers in there. And it basically, I was just going to actually, I'm on her website right now. I'm going to read this. All in a Day's Sex Work is a photographic investigation into the daily lives of the intriguing, oft maligned, and dedicated professionals who occupy our fantasies and indulge our deepest erotic urges. So that was just in exactly what you were saying, to echo it. These are the folks that occupy our fantasies and indulge our deepest erotic urges. And yet we're the most stigmatized. And if you watch porn, then guess what? You participated in the sex industry, right?
Yep.
So
exactly.
It's amazing if you hear people who are super conservative talk about these things in that hypocritical light. It's like, oh, have you ever watched, porn on? No? Okay, I'm sure you haven't. So
yeah, exactly.
But those are the folks that are railing the loudest. And, one of the things that you hear a lot about folks who do have good intentions, but have a one-dimensional perspective about sex work that is probably influenced by media representations of us as the helpless victim and these kinds of things, because the prostitute always get killed on every, TV show and every film, somebody kills the prosty. Right. And it's usually a serial killer, and it's this and it's that. And, or she's a drug addict or whatever, daddy issues, all these stereotypes. Right. So it's definitely understandable that people have with good intentions have a negative perspective about sex work, because we have helped to perpetuate that in our media representations and portrayals of sex workers. Right. And some sex workers have a lot of internalized negativity about their own sex work, and they have a right. If they, personal empowerment is subjective, as Blair says. It's very subjective, because maybe Heather and I feel really good about our sex work, so maybe some people don't. It's like if you work at McDonald's, some people may love working at McDonald's. Some people are just doing it for the money. Some people are doing it because they need to survive, right? Some people are doing it until they get something else. It's work. It should be treated as work. Yeah. Some people love being a doctor. Some people hate it.
And it brings up the same thing, like they're probably percentage-wise, if we actually had any research, would find that the same number of people at McDonald's have daddy issues and are victims and hate their lives as much as any other industry.
Okay. Lawyers too.
Exactly. Lawyers too. Definitely lawyers. Come on. Some of them just are packaged a lot neater, right? They're packaged a lot. They hide their issues better. Right?
Yeah.
And the culture makes sure that they're hidden quite well.
I mean, by that logic, like if we just said, oh, sex workers, there's a lot of people who are victimized or who are coerced into it. It's like, what about dentists who all kill themselves? Like,
exactly.
Do we take away dentistry? Because like dentists, and how many dentists are coerced by their family and parents to become a dentist? I'd say most of them.
People don't talk about that because it's a culturally acceptable form of coercion, right? If you feel, and maybe not coercion is the correct word, but if you feel pressured, right, to go into a particular type of work because that's what's expected of you and that's the socially acceptable thing to do, why is that not looked upon as coercion, right? Exactly. Why is that not looked upon, if someone's not going to give you the money for your higher education unless you become a doctor, how is that not coercive, right? If your parents are like, no, I'm not gonna do that. Now, some people may say, no, it's not coercive. It's just their expectation, right? But at the same point, the idea of coercion itself is that you're not making free and you're not making free personal choices for yourself, right? There are things that are being sometimes blackmailed, sometimes power is being withheld and opportunities are withheld from you in order for you to, quote unquote, consent, right? So, it's a bigger conversation. I'm sure a lot of people more articulate than I can speak on it. But at least from my viewpoint, I see that there's a lot of hypocrisy in this world. And, if we can find a way to see sex workers as workers, I always say, every time I say sex work, people always focus on the sex and not on the work, right? And if we can move that narrative towards the second word there, then we can start implementing, better labor conditions for our sex workers. There are other countries around the world that sex work is legalized and decriminalized, and largely that's what we want in the sex workers' rights movement. We want to see decriminalization happen. New Zealand has had decriminalization for decades now. So there's other places where they don't have this backwards kind of mentality, where they see sex workers as a part of work. Some people, it's legalized and they like it regulated, but people should be able to make that choice for themselves. There are sex workers that are unionized that have HR departments, right? And they have protections and health insurance and, these kinds of things that any labor should have. And should have a right.
It's so funny that sex is all good and honorable as long as it's free. But I don't go, cook and then, be like, well, it's something that you can do and it's a skill that you have as a woman. And, you like doing it. We always talk about this. You like doing it. So why do you have to charge for it?
Exactly. Oh, my God. That's the best metaphor, the cooking metaphor. Spot on.
And you see that a lot in the woo-woo world too. Well, you like doing retreats and you like giving massages and you like doing Reiki. So why does it have to cost this much? It's so weird. There's 4 professions where apparently you should be paid for. And it's
exactly.
Politician and sports guy.
So true. So true. And we don't value the body, right? So we don't value the
I think
body.
A lot of guys think sex should be free. A lot of people think sex should be free because, I need it. I don't know what the reasoning is behind it. I do know that for years, having sugar daddies or my very quick foray into being a dom myself. Thank you, Jay, which didn't pan out the way.
But you look damn good in that dress, though.
She looks damn good in the clothes, and my photo shoot was on point. That's where it kind of ended. But what I did notice when I looked around was a lot of empowerment, a lot of fun, a lot of camaraderie. And again, I'm speaking from my own personal experience. There's a spectrum and things can get dark, but things are also really good on another end of the spectrum where I made great money. I felt like I was treated like a woman for some of the first dates of my life. I met lifelong friends I still have dinner with to this day in that industry. So there's a lot of good, and it takes, people like me speaking up and going no, this is an actual job. It's a good job. It pays well. It empowers me. It makes me feel better. I learn a lot. I make good friends. You know what I mean? All the things you would want out of a job.
Yeah, Heather, but really, can it give you a little bit more than that? It's what do you want, people? What do you want from work? You just said it.
Yeah,
it makes you feel good. It pays you well. It gives you a sense of empowerment. You have lifelong friends. It's what else do people want from their fucking job?
What is going on? And it's my choice and it's my body. And why are we here talking about this now?
Correct.
I agree. How are we still here talking about this?
How are we still here talking? We're still here talking about this because women are a part of the problem. I know I'm going to get in trouble for saying that, but we are a part of the problem because we slut shame each other, because we're insecure and we have this ability to cut down women who are going against the grain, who are speaking out their minds. We like to tell them what they can do with their bodies. I mean, lots of white women put Trump in that damn White House, right? Those were women that heard the stories and the allegations of sexual harassment and misconduct from him and didn't give a flying fuck. Not if it meant that he could get in. You see what I'm saying? So we are part of the problem. We like to divide ourselves. And why do they need to spend more time and money trying to, suppress us? We're really good at dividing ourselves.
Well, I think we were talking with our guest last week, Carly Romeo, who does Feminist Camp, about this. And we were saying, the thing that we always have to remember about the patriarchy is it doesn't just affect men. It isn't just about men. It isn't just about men in power. It's about putting women and like our entire gender down below everything. So like, of course, women are going to internalize that too. I'm sure there's plenty of women who, like you were saying, who support Trump or who say like, oh, those women were probably just sluts. They probably just deserved it. And, you know, he's a powerful man. They just wanted some of his power. Like, they're internalizing all of those same narratives, even though it's against their own gender. Like, they're completely just, you know, using the same ones too, which is really sad.
Right, because they've swallowed that narrative. Like you said, they have internalized all of that. You know, my friend Melissa Bruto over at SOAR said something. She wrote a really great article too, and I think it was BuzzFeed. If you want to learn about consent and boundaries, listen to Sex Workers. I think that's the title of it. And she says that sex workers are experts on consent. Now, she's an attorney. She's a decriminalization attorney, and she fights for survivors of trafficking and for sex workers' rights. But when she said that, I really kind of have been thinking about that a lot and actually quoted her in my own article. It didn't get in. So it looked like I was saying that.
I think it did.
Yeah, it looked like I was saying that, but I was actually quoting her. And, you know, sex workers are experts on consent. I think that might be true. Right, because we definitely, you know, when you have a sexual encounter for money, the boundaries are very clear of what will and will not transpire, right? So there's not sort of this opportunity in the same way for nonverbal kind of, oh, I thought that I could, and she looked like she was fine with it, and this and that, right? Sort of this nonverbal thing that we hear a lot when these men behaving badly try to defend themselves. Exactly. It was consensual, blah, blah, blah. When you're a sex worker, it's like, okay, so this beat down will cost this much. You know, no marks here, no marks here. This is fine, blah, blah, blah. In the same way, you know, if you're an escort, okay, blowjob's fine. I don't like to have my feet played with when we're having sex, whatever it is. It's so upfront, right? By and large, for most sex workers. So we have we need to have an opportunity to speak at this table and to not have people speaking for us.
Yeah.
But to give us a space, and again, not just my perspective, but other people's perspectives, people who feel like it's survival work. You know, I did it because I had to. Yeah. And I feel like indifferent about it. It is what it is. Those narratives as well need to be there. You know,
but they don't need to be like the only ones, which is so funny because I was trying to imagine, you know, like I was in sales for a few years, which was a fucking nightmare. And me and most of the people like around me like hated our lives and like drank ourselves to death and, you know, all these things. Like, can you imagine if like for 50 years in the media, all you ever heard about sales was like the victims who were forced into it and like hated their lives and like, you know, and like couldn't take it. It's like, yeah, you could make that narrative. I really do feel like about so many jobs, right? There's so many jobs that just like plain suck. They just like plain suck a lot. But for some reason,
people don't want to do it.
For some reason, sex work, like you never ever, other than like, honestly, all I can really think of when I was growing up was like, what was that show? Real Sex on HBO, right? Where it was just like positive, fun, people were laughing, a lot of just like kind of like, you know, different, a strip club or like an orgy or this or that, and then they would interview people on the street. That's the only thing I ever had seen that wasn't about like how scary and negative and dark any of that world is. Exactly.
And you know, we had, you know, talked about this before, this idea of, you know, one of the reasons why there's only one perspective and one narrative is because it's not sexy. It's not sexy to be happy, right? What we were talking about earlier. Like when you're happy, people don't like it when you're happy. They'll listen to you bitch and moan about all of the problems that you have and the stresses about your day and your life and your work. But if you're like, wow, I really love my life, I love my work, or this or that, you know, we don't like that shit, right? We don't want to hear that shit. So in other words, there's a reason why, you know, there's a one-dimensional or has been historically a one-dimensional perspective on sex work, particularly in media portrayals, is because it's not sexy. You can't make a good victim in SVU from somebody that's just, you see what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, exactly.
It's loaded because it has more creative value for that character to be a drug addict, to be someone who hates men that suddenly tends to love them, to be someone who's coerced, the pretty woman narrative, to down on her luck, but then she meets the millionaire, or the, or even the 50 Shades of Grey shit, which is this idea, that's really problematic for a lot of people in the BDSM community, right? This idea that this person who is, by all intents and purposes, a pathological mess, who has been abused and is abusive verbally, is somehow this like sexual god, right? That's going to come in and fulfill all of these hidden fantasies and unlock these desires. But if you look at that relationship between those two characters, it is really fucking dysfunctional. Like, he's jealous. He doesn't listen to her. He's controlling. He's insecure, right? And not in a way that's established, right? They didn't establish those boundaries. He just does this shit without her permission. Like, he's just kind of an asshole.
Yeah,
right? And so an asshole is not dominant. He's just kind of a dick.
He's just a dick. Yep.
He's just a dick with great abs, and it's just, that's that kind of perspective when you have, we don't like nuance. We like things that are really hot. And on an energy level, on an energetic level, we like hot, right? So we like fiery, we like spicy. You know what I mean by that? We don't like that sort of middle ground that you were talking about earlier, the subtlety. We like things to be very extreme in our culture.
Well, there's also the good girl, bad girl. So like the bad girls, like, yeah, they have sex for money and they do this, and the good girls would never. I mean, they have sex, for love. And that's it. And all the sex that they have is consensual, and it's amazing. And
and it's missionary.
And it's missionary. And I think I saw I was watching one bad Netflix movie where this woman was an escort. She was going around having sex. And at first they started her and she's empowered. She's got power suits and great heels, and her apartment's beautiful. But of course, in the end, this patriarchal, what I really want is to find the one, and I'm just empty. I'm empty in all of this until I find a husband where I can, just have normal sex with my one true. And I'm like, oh, God. And that shit is totally ingrained in us. Like, I'm standing up for all the good girls in sex work that grew up in a normal fucking household with a good dad, and that feel empowered. Like, it runs the spectrum, okay?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, we got to give people space to be 360 degrees of a person, to have shitty days with their sex work, to have great days, to, for people, and it goes beyond even the sex work aspect. It goes about sexual freedom. That's a real big conversation about here. We're saying, we're talking about how we're allowed to express our sexual selves. And if you even go deeper than that, we're talking about how we're allowed to behave. Mm-hmm. What our culture says is acceptable for our behavior. What our country says acceptable for our behavior. So take the sex out of it. At the end of the day, it's people telling us how to behave. That this is okay and this is not okay.
Yep. And also, it's my choice. It's my body. It's not about you. The minute it's so weird, it's that weird body thing, where you're like, I don't know. I could rant all day.
Well, it's true.
No, you're right on.
It's like Jay, like she was saying, like, why are we allowed to submit our minds and our emotions to any type of stress we want, right? Any type of like working 100 hours a week, being completely stressed out to where you're just on pills all day and drinking to forget and not sleeping, like that's totally fine. But you want to like do something a little bit different with your body? Oh no, absolutely not allowed. Can't do it. Illegal. I mean, what is like? That's so weird, right?
It is so weird. It's a really bizarre backwards mentality. And when you sort of break it down to its smallest parts, exactly what you said. It's fine to work 100 hours a week, to pop a bunch of pills, to be unhappy, depressed, have a bunch of anxiety, have dysfunctional relationships. That's fine. And it's usually rewarded, by the way. That means you're working hard. You're a hard worker.
You're sticking it out. You're grinding.
You're grinding. But if you decide that you want to work for yourself, work 20 to 30 hours a week, maybe, You want to get paid 5 or 6 times the amount that of your hourly wage that you normally would. You'd like to also have some safe sex and enjoy yourself and have some orgasms while you're doing it, and help other people have orgasms and connect with them on a human level. That is awful. By the way, you know, all these things on a biological level, you know, having sex, you know, what's happening in your body, serotonin, you know, how the oxytocin, taking all of these stress hormones out of our body, which is, or you know, orgasms do these things. We know this, the actual health benefits of sexuality, healthy sexuality, what it physically does to your body, that doesn't even have a space.
And oh, by the way, a lot of times the gentlemen that I was working with, they just wanted to be hugged and listened to. Exactly. I mean, the sex ended up being very little of the reason why they came to me in the first place, where a lot of men just felt unseen, ignored, and hadn't had touch or a feminine energy around them in a while.
Exactly. Exactly. And you know, even to go deeper in this, you know, this is all the things that we're talking about too, this whole idea of, you know, not being able to have sexual agency. What about folks who are living with serious physical disabilities? When we live in a culture that says that sex work in, you know, escorting and these kinds of things is illegal, we are saying, hey, person, to these folks that are on the edges of our culture, such as like the physically disabled person, we're saying to them, hey, listen, you good luck getting like your sexual rocks off. Hope it works out for you. By the way, we're going to make fun of you. By the way, we're going to not have places that are, you know, accessible for you. By the way, we're going to treat you like a one-dimensional figure in culture and media. And if you desire to have a sexual connection with somebody, you know, maybe you want to pay that person for it. Nah, that's okay. So it's like, what about for folks who don't even have the ability to masturbate, right? I have play partners that have no mobility from the neck down. This is an ableist perspective. You know, okay, just deal with it yourself. Well, what if you physically cannot do that? What if you cannot have the ability to pleasure yourself sexually in any kind of way, or express your sexual self to someone with your physical body, or you have limitations doing that, such as mobility issues? Like,
that's something I've never even thought of. Like, that's just like another level.
You see what I'm saying? This is reality for some folks that are living with these kinds of impairments, you know, and they have to find innovative and creative ways to express themselves sexually. But when you take sex work out as a possibility for them, I think that's really fucking cruel.
Yeah.
You're saying that, you know, it's like, just, you know, the deck is stacked against them. And, you know, in the UK, and different parts of Europe, there are, you know, some sex workers are actually, you know, allowed to be paid by the government through, you know, these kinds of different programs that, you know, for folks who are needing some type of sexual release that are physically disabled, you know, and so there are models here where we can look at people who, whether they're sexual surrogates and these kinds of things, where it has a very powerful therapeutic benefit to people's lives and their sexual health and their mental health. You know, I don't know what I would do if I wasn't able to masturbate or to be able to touch my partner or my partners, right? Like, and to say to somebody that you're not allowed to have a sex worker connect and help you in that situation is cruel. It's deeply cruel.
It is very cruel. It would be the same thing as saying if someone got in a car accident, like, oh, we don't, it's illegal to have physical therapists, so just like try to walk on your own. Good luck.
Yeah.
You gotta do yourself.
Yeah, it's really messed up, you know, and so we have all of these very ableist perspectives that we're thinking about policy and from, right? This is from this perspective of having full, you know, capacity to do whatever you want to do with your body. And that's not the case, and that's not the reality for some folks out there. So I think that we need to have a bigger conversation. And I think that the sex worker rights movement is kind of where the marijuana legalization movement was about 10, 15 years ago. We're at the precipice of it, where we're starting to open up our mind and even have the conversations, and, you know, and the same way that, you know, medical marijuana was sort of the gateway for recreational usage and for us to get rid of these outdated, antiquated, laws. I wouldn't be surprised if the sex worker rights movement started in that same capacity of, this idea of sexual surrogacy, or workers for the disabled. I wouldn't be surprised if that might be the. I mean, I don't know. I've had a few ideas about that in the past, and folks that are doing that, and so it at the very least that needs to happen. So in my view.
So J Leigh, what are you working on now? Like, what are the next steps for you as an activist and working in this field, and maybe even expanding into what someone could do and where they could look to get involved?
Well, right now, I've been helping organize the Sex Workers Festival of Resistance, which is really fucking cool. MoMA PS1 here in New York has brought us on to a bunch of sex workers and activists to put on, a one-day festival talking about issues of sex work. So if you are in the New York area, and this gets out in time, March 4th in 2018, we will be at MoMA PS1 talking about a lot of these issues with, lots of different perspectives, diversity in sex work, sex migration. We'll be showing films. I helped co-curate the film program for that, and there'll be performances as well. So that's kind of what's been on a lot of our radar, and it's kind of a big deal. This is the first of its kind here in the United States to celebrate sex work as a artistic expression, and to have such a, prestigious institution such as MoMA, really valuing our work is a big step in that direction. A few weeks ago, we sex workers organized with the Women's March here in New York, and my partner and I marched there last year, but there was a lot of controversy around that, because the organizers of the Women's March, took out their, mentioning of sex workers a few weeks before the march happened last year. And it was a big deal for sex workers, because once again, we got other women holding us down and shaming us, right? So they've been doing some very intentional repair, and Janet Mock, trans activist, has been really great about bridging that gap as a former sex worker and a woman of color. So we're seeing some repair in that way, but it's slow moving. I think definitely having us in the conversation with the Me Too movement would be really nice, to get us in there and lump us in with, migrant workers and domestic workers. Sex workers need to have their place within that sentence as well. So that's what I'm working on right now. And the Sex Hume project, I'm going to be helping out, volunteering for that in some capacity, and hopefully applying to PhD programs and getting into them. I'll be applying. I'm just hoping to get in. So yeah. And I just want to thank you, both for giving me this opportunity to talk about, this very much needed work. Like I said, there are folks that have been fighting this fight a hell of a lot longer than I have. And we're at a tipping point, and that's really nice. But every single person can fight this suppression by living their best lives, by examining their own behaviors and their words, including myself, by being introspective, by thinking about their opinions about things, approaching them from a different perspective, and asking themselves, well, why do I feel that way? I always kind of look at the resistance in my life. Like, I think it's a good indicator. Where is my resistance? Where is my judgment? What is it trying to protect? Because it's trying to protect something. It's there as a gatekeeper trying to protect something in my brain or in my body that I think needs protecting. So when I see that resistance, I always ask myself, where is the feeling of non-safety that this thing is trying to protect? And if I can ask myself that, then, many times what's on the other side of that is healing and forgiveness and grace and understanding and compassion. But that doesn't happen unless we ask ourselves hard questions and we're honest about who we are and our intentions. So I think that
really beautiful. Honestly.
Thank you. I mean, it's, it's lots of trial and error, right, that has led me to that, and a lot of just, narrow-mindedness on my part, and I'm sure more will be to come, but, at least we're doing the work, right? That's the yoga. That's the practice, is just doing the work of it.
Woo. That's the mindfulness. If we want to pull it in, like, why do you think what you think? You better know.
Yeah, exactly. You better know. It's
and we need to ask ourselves why we're so sex negative. Why do we feel that our bodies are not beautiful? Why do women hate their bodies? Why do they not look at their bodies? Why do they not touch their bodies? Why do they let the wrong people have access to their bodies after they're treated badly? Right?
It's sex dirty. Why does someone deserve it?
Why?
All these words that we use.
Why can't, and then if we are treated with disrespect, why can't we believe those that are saying that they experience victimhood? Why do we question that? Why do we put them through more trauma? We need to empower women. We need to empower men. We need to empower humans to be honest about what they want, be unafraid to ask for what they want, and then be respectful when that does not happen, that they don't get what they want. So all of those things need to happen in our sex education. Of course, that's going to happen from like a policy perspective. Hopefully, I'd love to be able to be a part of that in some kind of way. But we have to have all those conversations, because it's not just about, no means no. It's not just about sexual agency. It's about, what do we do when our egos are bruised? When you hit on somebody and they say no, how do you handle that? I'm in certain circles where, if I go to sex parties, one of the things that we like to say when someone asks, hey, would you like to hang out, or would you like to make out, or whatever it is that happens at a sex party, when they say no, the other person is encouraged to say, thank you for loving yourself. Thank you for treating yourself well. Thank you for saying that to me. We actually encourage them to thank the person for being good to themselves in the moment, and to giving themselves what they need in that moment.
What a different perspective that is. That's so
crazy. It's a different perspective. It's not, because always people think they're afraid to say no. They're afraid to hurt someone's feelings. But when we change the perspective of how we treat rejection from I'm bad, I'm not worthy, I'm not loved, to thank you for doing what's right for yourself. Mm-hmm. You move the energy about yourself towards giving it back to that person. It's about them. It's not about you. So I think we need to have these conversations too.
I want to start saying that to anyone. Like, if I, just that idea of, someone, gosh, I mean, we get this a lot, right? As women, or as people pleasers, or as helpers, or as, people who like to be helping or entertaining, is that we think, if someone rejects us or someone says no, that it's always about us. And it really should be, you should be proud that someone, because as a person to where it's hard to say no sometimes, because that, and the main reason it's hard to say no is because you start projecting onto that person that you're saying no to how they're going to feel. So you're like, I'd rather just not make them feel bad, and so I won't say no and do it for myself. It's a crazy cycle.
No, but that's what we're taught to do, and particularly women are taught to do that. That our emotions come last. They come worse than last. They come maybe last, if we're lucky that they ever come at all. Right?
Yep. Everybody
else's emotions are more important than us. We're here to guard the culture. We're here to protect the system, and that's what we're taught. Right? Over and over and over again from the time that we're small. That we always come last. We always come last. So we have to train the men to project that value, because it's been taken from us, and a lot of times they are doing the taking. So it's not just about us doing the work here. Again, it's that whole idea of why the fuck do we always have to do the work, right? It's why do we have to do the fucking work all the time? There was this a couple years ago, I saw, I don't know if it was a TED Talks or some shit, where it was this guy that, like a white cis het guy, presumably, I'm pretty sure he was het, said, was talking about how if we want to see a female equality, then women need to stop demanding or expecting for men to pay for their dates. And that was his whole spiel. And it was supposed to be this groundbreaking thing of like, women, if you want to feel empowered, stop expecting men to spend money on you every date. Do it half and half, right? So he's supposed to be this dating coach. And I kept sitting there thinking to myself, why the fuck do we have to do all of these things? Why the fuck aren't you sitting there talking to a group of men, right? His whole idea is, oh, yeah, well, that affirms the patriarchy, that women, expect to have men pay. That's all we got, bitch. Right?
Yeah, and we make less money. Y'all don't even pay us enough. I can't afford my meal.
Exactly.
I'm making 70 cents on the dollar.
There you go. That's exactly what I'm saying. Like, why don't you take them 30 cents off the dollar? Why don't you multiply it however many hours I fucking worked in my goddamn life? Right. And then see if your $50 you spent on dinner kind of adds up to that. So at the end of the day, we hold on to what we have because we don't have anything. So until you give me equal representation in the government, which is 50% of this population is women. You think we got 50% women up in our government? Hell no.
No way.
Right? Give me a female president. Give me a female vice president.
Maybe I will pay for my prime rib.
Maybe I will. You go first. You go first. Right? I'm not going to give up what I have, what little power. And honestly, many times our sexual power is what we have, right?
Yeah. Oh, big time.
It's one of the reasons why there aren't as many, male, hetero sex workers, because we do have a power imbalance there.
Right.
But that's all we fucking have. So until we get all those things, we're going to hold on to this motherfucker for a long time. You see what I'm trying to say?
It's the only time that an ear perks up.
I mean, that's me getting real preachy and, find out where I come from a little bit. But I'm trying to say that, at the end of the day, why are we always expected to be the first to give up more? We already gave it all up. You took it away from us. We never had it.
Yeah, so, we never had it in the first place.
We never had it.
And for this guy to say, like, hey, do you want, like, my entire gender and my entire sexual identity to start treating you better? Why don't you do something about it? Like, that's so crazy.
Isn't that nuts? And it was supposed to be this groundbreaking thing. And I was like, wow, this is some more serious bullshit here, which is telling women what they should do. Telling women what they should do. Just that. You're telling a group of women what they should do. You are not qualified to make that choice. You don't get that luxury. You see what I'm trying to say? And, anyway, I'm harping on this person, but
I will say this. Growing up in the church, they used to say that we had to watch what we could wear because we would lead the men astray. And this whole thing of like, if I pay for dinner, the man won't think I'm a strong, woman that doesn't want to be raped. It's like, now you guys are just saying that you're retarded. Or, can't use that word, sorry. Now you guys are just saying that you have no agency over yourself, that you're being duped around every corner by us women in our feminine wiles wearing shorts. Exactly. Chicken. You know what I mean?
Well,
guys,
I better spread my legs wide open now.
Right. Thanks for the Cali.
And men are that weak. That's what we're saying. We're saying women are that dumb and men are that weak.
Yes.
Yeah. It's bad for both. It's bad for everyone. All of those things where like they can't control themselves and then we have to control them, but then we can't control ourselves. And so then they have to, it's like, oh my gosh, you guys.
It's so crazy. I mean,
all of us are better than this.
All of us, we're all better than this. You know, and one of the things I told, that Time reporter too was that, sex workers were treated the worst in this way because, we're not the perfect victim, right? Because, the idea is this culture narrative saying you can't rape a hoe, right? So if you're a sex worker, you get to do whatever you want, right? So that's one. Then if we are the victim, nobody believes us.
Yep.
Right? Nobody believes us when it happens. And then, you see what I'm trying to say? It goes both ways. When women are victimized, when we're victimized, no one believes us, right? But I don't know. I don't know if I'm articulating very well.
It's all poopy poop.
Yeah.
But it's getting better.
Double standards. It's a double standard from the top to the better. Hopefully it is getting better.
So you guys,
I believe it. Women like you.
Oh, sorry. I wanted to kind of end on this quote that like really relates to everything we've been talking about and just also just made me chuckle and think of some interesting moments in my life. And I'm sure both of you guys will relate to this. There's a girl on, it was on Twitter, her name's Duduzane Gupta, and she says, if you've ever tried to put your finger up a straight guy's ass during sex, you'll know that they actually totally understand ongoing consent, withdrawal of consent, and sexual boundaries very well. They act confused when it's our bodies.
Wow.
Amen.
Beautiful.
Isn't that so true?
It's so true.
Never seen a butt clench up faster in my life. That's the truth. They get it. We get it. We can all do better. It takes mindfulness. It takes knowing why you think what you think and expanding your reality that things can be maybe a little different than what you currently think. And that takes a lot of listening. I will say that.
You are 100% correct.
Well, J Leigh, you are amazing. I'm like so proud of the work that you've been doing and just how you've grown. And I mean, I don't know. I just feel like I'm just so proud of you. I'm just so proud to know you.
I miss you. We've come a long way from tripping on mushrooms and trying to move watermelons and Montauk.
Oh my God.
Yeah, but that had a lot to do with this expansion, okay?
You
don't go on a mushroom trip for nothing.
That's right. It's the beginning of opening up that narrative. You know, actually, I was thinking, first of all, thank you for saying that, Amanda. And I love you both tremendously. You're so deep in my heart. You're my favorites. And you're so fucking funny. And I miss the hell out of you both. And I'm really proud of you and the choices that you both are making in your life. You've worked radically to pursue your own happiness. And that is no small feat. No one gets points for pursuing their happiness in our culture, but you get gold stars from me because I think it's the bravest thing you could do is to pursue your own bliss. It's the bravest thing you can do.
Aww.
And
thanks, J Leigh.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about our summer in Montauk, the magic summer. Just this, how impactful it was, and how grateful I am I got to share that time with y'all. It's really wonderful.